Imagine, in the middle of a remote African desert, a group of scientists discover the skeleton of an ancient creature. But this is no ordinary fossil. 8 million years old, older than any known record of human history, more sophisticated than anyone could ever hope to find. This discovery shook the world of science. Scientists were silenced, data was confiscated, and some of them disappeared without a trace. What exactly did they discover? Who were the creatures that came before us? And why are some trying to hide it all? This story isn't just fiction. It's a warning. A mystery that unlocks the door to a long-buried past. Before we begin, leave a comment. What would you think if human history turned out to be wrong all along? The hot African sun scorched the barren soil of the Turkana Valley in northern Kenya. Dry winds whipped up reddish-brown dust that curled gently across the open desert. In this remote location, an international archaeological expedition team began what initially seemed like a mundane fieldwork. No one suspected that this excavation would become the most surprising discovery of the century. Professor Leonard Mikhail, a senior paleoanthropologist from Russia, stood at the edge of a mound of earth with a look of anticipation. Around him, students and young scientists busily used shovels and small brushes, combing through the soil layer by layer. They searched for bone fragments, stones, or artifacts that might hold clues to the past. Suddenly, a local technician named Kamau let out a loud shout. He pointed into the small hole he had just dug. The team immediately gathered. Inside the meter-deep hole, a brownish jawbone was revealed, complete with an intact molar tooth. But something was odd. The bone was too large. Its tooth structure was unlike any other ancient human ever discovered. As the skull surfaced, Professor Mikhail's heart raced. Thick jaws, deep eye sockets, and a massive skull. None of this made sense for a species thought to have lived millions of years ago. A few days later, excavations revealed a more complete skeleton. Its body was about 2 meters long. The legs showed perfect upright walking ability. But what was most disturbing were the remains of stone tools found nearby. They weren't just ordinary sharp stones, but stones carved with precision and symmetry. These weren't the work of an animal or an early human. These were the work of a thinking creature. Preliminary radiometric measurements dated the fossil to 8 million years old. When the results came back, silence fell over the camp. There was no laughter, no celebration. There were only gasps of disbelief and frightened whispers. This is impossible," said one of the young researchers, Fatima, in a trembling voice. "This is older than Australopithecus. Older than all of them." Professor Mikhail stared at the results without a word. In his heart, he knew. If these results were true, the history of human evolution taught for hundreds of years would collapse. But deep down, he sensed there was something even bigger they didn't know. Something that should have remained buried in silence. That night, the camp was tense. The researchers couldn't sleep. Some suspected the fossils weren't those of ancient humans, but rather something undocumented. And in the dark of night, a rustling sound was heard coming from the direction of the fossil pile. A guard reported a strange shadow moving near the excavation area. But when they approached, there was nothing there. But one thing was for sure, from that day on, none of them would look at human history the same way. Upon his arrival in Moscow, Professor Mikhail took the fossils and soil samples from the excavation site to a secret facility belonging to the National Science University. The underground laboratory was not documented in public documents. Only a handful of senior scientists knew it existed. This is where Mikhail usually analyzed controversial finds, far from the media spotlight and political pressure. Every day, he and his small team examined every detail. The genetic structure of the bone fragments was tested, carbon isotopes were reanalyzed, and the attached mineral layers were examined using an electron microscope. All the results pointed to one improbable conclusion. The fossil was indeed 8 million years old. But there was one more disturbing discovery. At the bottom of the pit where the fossils were found, a very regular pattern of burn marks was recorded. It was as if a man-made fire had once burned there. This was absurd. Controlled fire was not found in human history until at least 1 million years ago. So who made it? Fatima, now Mikhail's main assistant, made a startling discovery while combing through ancient archival documents from the Soviet era. It contained an unofficial report about a secret expedition in 1959. The location? Right in the Turkana Valley. The document was accompanied by blurry photographs. One showed a large metal coffin, sealed shut, being carried by armed soldiers. There was no explanation of its contents. But what made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end was the next photo, a black and white image of a large skeleton that closely resembled their find. Mikhail stared at the photo for a long time. So, this isn't the first time it's been found, he muttered. Then he took a deep breath. And they've been hiding it. For decades. When they tried to access the digital records connected to the International Archaeological Research Network, their data was immediately blocked. A code red warning appeared. Access denied, top-level classification. A few hours later, their laboratory system was compromised. All computers were locked, and a mysterious message appeared on the screen. Stop. You don't understand what you're disturbing. Tensions were rising. Mikhail decided to move the fossil to a safer location. But as their van was about to exit the laboratory gate, 2 black vehicles without license plates blocked the road. 4 large men got out without a word. Their faces were expressionless. They raised their hands and motioned for Mikhail and Fatima to get out of the vehicle. One of them spoke in cold Russian. We'll take over from now on. You will not continue this research. Fatima shivered. She looked at Mikhail, expecting resistance. But the professor just stared straight ahead, furious but helpless. That fossil, they'll get rid of it, Fatima whispered. Mikhail shook his head slowly. They can't get rid of all the evidence. Because there's one thing they don't know yet. Hidden in his pocket was a small fragment of the mysterious skull. Enough to reveal the truth. But they had to run. And they knew from that night on they were no longer ordinary scientists. They were targets. Mikhail and Fatima were hiding in an old apartment on the outskirts of Tbilisi, Georgia. The place belonged to Mikhail's old friend, a geologist named David Arsenids, who had helped him rescue rare artifacts from being destroyed in a museum during the war. They worked in secret, using only rudimentary equipment, but enough to continue analyzing the bone fragments they had managed to salvage. What they discovered was more than surprising. The DNA structure wasn't entirely human. There were unfamiliar genetic sequences that didn't match any previously documented species. There were even protein fragments that could only survive in natural cryogenic conditions, as if the creature had been preserved by natural forces for millions of years. Then something even stranger emerged. Under the microscope, Fatima noticed microscars on the skull, as if the creature had undergone some kind of brain surgery. But not with modern instruments. Instead, it had been done with a precision that even our current surgical technology lacks. David, who was involved in researching ancient mines, described a network of caves in the mountainous region surrounding Dagestan that, according to local legend, was a dead city abandoned by an ancient race. Folklore calls it the one who came before the light. The 3 of them journeyed into the remote mountains. Amidst the bitter cold and rocky paths barely passable by vehicles, they discovered a cave entrance covered in bushes and rocks. Inside, a narrow tunnel stretched, descending ever deeper until they finally reached a large stone chamber, its walls carved with symbols never before seen. In the center of the chamber stood a circular stone structure shaped like an altar. Beneath it something was buried. Carefully they dug, uncovering a sarcophagus made of metal not of earth origin. The metal was uncorroded, unscratched, and warm to the touch. When Mikhail touched the circular pattern on it, a low sound echoed from the ground. The sarcophagus opened by itself. Inside there was not only a fossil. There was also a device they didn't understand. Made of dark blue crystal, it hovered slightly in the air, emitting pulses of light like a heartbeat. There were no buttons, no screens, But as Fatima approached, the light changed. Symbols appeared in the air, forming an ancient map encompassing the entire world. David slowly backed away. These aren't just ancient humans. They ruled the earth long before us. That's when it dawned on them. The creatures in the fossils weren't human ancestors, but the rulers of Earth who had already existed. And the device was a remnant of their technology, perhaps a key, or a warning. Suddenly the ground shook. The echo in the tunnel turned to a rumble. The cave began to collapse. They had only seconds. Fatima grasped the device, Mikhail carried the bone, and they ran down the dark passage, trying to leave the cave before it was completely buried by rock and dust. Outside they fell silent, gasping for breath. The sky darkened. The wind shifted direction. And in the distance, a sound like a muffled explosion could be heard. The device in Fatima's hand still glowed, though dimly. The world would never know what truly happened. Because since that night, their traces have disappeared from all records. But somewhere in this world, in a nameless dark space, the truth still beats, waiting for its moment to awaken.